afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you may be in this wonderful world of ours and listening to our show. This is Michael Cross here with another episode of Unlock the Door Radio, where, as always, we ask you to question authority. That's not just coming from me. That's coming from Benjamin Franklin, who said it's a duty of all patriots to question authority at all times. Now, I'm just thinking now that questioning authority is something people should be doing now more than ever. And why is that? Because it seems like those in authority seem to really they are either totally insane or corrupt or whatever when it comes to many of our policies, especially in foreign policy. And right now what I'm just going to deal with in this first half of the show is basically something that should be something on everyone's mind. Obviously it's not. I don't know. Maybe there's more important things because maybe there's something else in the news, like some movie stars getting their nipples pierced, or there's someone kicking a ball around on a soccer field. I don't know. Really vital things in reference to the way the world is. Well, maybe I'll deal with something a little bit less vital than those kinds of issues, and that is Iraq. How much has America invested in Iraq? Now, I don't care how you feel about it. Should we have invaded? Shouldn't we have invaded? Whatever. But the U.S. has invested thousands of lives, hundreds of billions, if not in the trillions of dollars, toppling Saddam Hussein, who I might add used to be our buddy. But we toppled him, got rid of him, installed a government that, at least on the face of it, it's pretty democratic compared to Saddam. And now that all seems to be at risk of just falling apart. And instead of getting something as bad as Saddam, we may get something far worse than Saddam. That's right, far worse. Now, I'm just going to give a little bit of background of Saddam. Now, he rose up in the Ba'ath Party. I've heard some reports that he had help from the U.S. I don't know if that's the case or not. But he rose up in the Ba'ath Party, took control of Iraq, and established a very nasty authoritarian regime. Okay? However, it was secular. I mean, women did have equality, and their education was very secular and so forth. But he ran afoul with the United States. It seems that he was, our, best friend forever. And then he may have misinterpreted some signs from the United States, where he was having some problems. He accused Kuwait of horizontally drilling under Iraqi territory and stealing oil. And that led to the first war in the early 90s. And then he was driven out of Kuwait. And then Iraq went through a period of some pretty severe sanctions, no-fly zones, and so forth through the 1990s under the Clinton administration. If anyone ever remembers that infamous interview with Madeleine Albright where she was asked if American objectives in Iraq were worth how many hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children were dying because of the sanctions. And she said, yeah, sure. But fast forward a little bit. We had the attacks on the World Trade Center, of which, ironically, a lot of people thought Saddam was involved, which he wasn't. Saddam Hussein was a secular Muslim. He had a secular government. There were people in his top levels of government that were actually Christian. Okay? That's not something you have in an Islamic government. And so for the most part, he was westernized under kind of a fascist model, but it was still a Western system. And he did not like Islamic militants. He was very much opposed to the Wahhabist ideals that were being spread by many clerics and activists in Saudi Arabia. He wanted to make sure that he kept a lid on this in his country. And it should be noted that he assisted the U.S. government in its efforts to track down and monitor all of these kind of people that were connected to Al-Qaeda. Okay? After 9/11, Saddam helped the United States. I'll also note that before the invasion of Afghanistan, Iran was instrumental in preventing the Taliban from destroying the Northern Alliance. Remember the Northern Alliance? They were that little tiny section up in northern Afghanistan that were fighting not to be taken over by the Taliban. And they were being assisted by Iran. Iran is Shia Muslim. This is something it seems that most people, even in our government, do not understand. There's a difference between Shia and Sunni. The Iranians are Shia. Most Sunnis are basically just regular, everyday type people. However, within the Sunni movement, you have the Wahhabists. There's other groups too, but you have the Wahhabists that want to return to. It would be like if you had suddenly a militant organization in the United States that wanted everyone to live like the Amish. Okay? That would be what the Wahhabists are to the Muslim population, even Sunnis. Now, this is where you get groups like Al-Qaeda coming from, and some of these groups like ISIS. They are very much into this idea of returning their countries to a very, 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 very strict form of Islam. This is the kind that would not grant women equality. This is the kind that would not allow for any kind of political dissent, and certainly not religious freedom. But these are the guys that sometimes the United States has worked with. We worked with them to get first of all, we kind of got them stirred up so they would challenge the government in Kabul in 1979. That's right, 1979. That was under the Carter administration. Brzezinski, these kind of guys. Well, anyway, we worked these guys up. They challenged the government in Kabul that was pro-Soviet. This forced the Russians' hands, so they moved in. They got bogged down in a war for a long time, lost a lot of men there. And then eventually the Taliban came in. And then, of course, we worked with these kinds of people during that time period because we figured, well, we shared the same objectives. Not really. I mean, say that we share the same objectives as some of these people would be like saying if you're in a campsite and you're simultaneously attacked by a bear and a cougar, that you're going to be better off if you side with the cougar and fight the bear. Okay? I mean, sometimes it's better just to get away from both of them or let them deal with each other or whatever. But the Taliban, when we decided to go in and take them out, and we could spend hours on whether that was justified or not. We tried to establish something similar to democracy in Afghanistan, and basically Afghanistan is still a tribal situation. It's broken up. If you look at the ethnic groups, look at Afghanistan and type in ethnic groups, and then type in areas where the Taliban are in control. You will notice everything is based on ethnicity. It's not a country that looks at things like, I'm born in America. It doesn't matter whether I'm Hispanic or black or white or Asian or whatever. I'm an American. No. This is a country where family comes first, ethnic group comes second, religion is interwoven. You can't even say third or first or whatever. It's just part of who you are in that country. But now Iraq's totally different. Iraq, to a large degree, was getting along. I mean, it was getting along with the strong arm of Saddam. And then we overthrew him. And, we went in there and we spent a lot of lives and a lot of money. And we wound up with a government that, like I said before, resembles something like democracy. Now, Fast forward a little bit. Arab Spring. The United States, Saudi Arabia, and several other Gulf states decide that they're going to use this to topple some of the secular governments. Now, maybe America wasn't saying, yeah, let's go after the secularists, but they didn't like Assad. Let's just focus in on Assad and leave Gaddafi and some of these others out of this. Now, the thing is, the irony we're getting is that we decided that we were going to assist in our, that's a clever way the United States puts it, assist the movements that were against Assad. Now, before we go on, I'll just note that Assad is a secularist. He's a Muslim. He's a Shia. Belongs to the Alawite tribe. And generally has traditionally had the support of the middle class Sunnis, middle class and upper class Sunnis, business class to a large degree, the Alawites, who are a Shia minority that used to be, kind of persecuted within the country, the Christian population, and some of the small minority religions within the country, smaller than the Christians. And he did set up a system that, basically enforced by law that you couldn't go out and, cut people's heads off that you didn't agree with and so forth. So it was kept under control through a strong, you could say, Leviathan, in a Hobbesian terms, type of leader. And the United States, for one reason or another, decided, let's topple this guy. We don't like him. Now, the thing is that in his country, maybe at first you may have had some idealists, but not any longer. The people that are fighting Assad are jihadists. I mean, I don't think you're going to find very many, if any, that aren't. Now, some of the jihadists might be somewhat moderate, if you can have a moderate jihadist. And then there's others that are very much extreme. Al-Nusra, which is associated with Al-Qaeda, and ISIS, which tends to be a little bit to the, I don't know if you could say the word right. Let's just say they're a little bit further off the edge than Al-Qaeda. But here's our problem in the Middle East and in Syria. What do? You go into a group of people that you're saying, this whole group of people saying, we're going up against Assad. We want to overthrow him. What do? We do it like in grade school? We ask, everyone raise your hands if you want democracy. Okay, well, everyone knows they better raise their hands. You're not going to say, how many of you are of Al-Qaeda? If you raise your hands, we're not going to give you anything. Any of you other guys, or you members of ISIS or whatever, no one's going to raise their hand. They're going to tell you what you want to hear. And it seems like America's like, oh, goody, goody. Here's you some rockets and guns and training and all this kind of stuff. Promise you'll use these against Assad? Oh, yeah, sure, we'll do that. Okay, well, we'll give you some more. Yeah, right. And you know what we have now? Obama. He's coming out and wanting to give, his solution to this whole mess is what? To arm the rebels some more? He wants to give $500 million to the rebels in Syria? Let me ask you a question. Had it not been for Vladimir Putin, for one, the British Parliament, for another, going against Obama's plan of bombing Syria last year, where would Syria be today? Let's just assume, even though it seems like the majority of people in Syria actually want Assad, or maybe we could say the majority do not want the alternative to Assad. The thing is that what if we had bombed him? What if we'd have droned his forces, hit him with Tomahawk cruise missiles, and so forth? Let's just not even talk about if we have accidentally hit a Russian ship and maybe start a nuclear war with Russia. Let's just say that we overthrew Assad. Let's say Assad's gone. The capital in Damascus is gone. What do you think would be happening today in Syria? Would they be holding elections and supporting a moderate, ethnically inclusive, religiously tolerant government? Would it look like something that Thomas Jefferson, George Washington would support? Come on. I think you know the answer to this. You would have had ISIS, instead of making headway throughout Iraq, they would already have Syria. And you know what? Then they'd be bordering Israel. And then we could just assume what would happen after that. I don't think Israel's going to, sit back and let them march in. So Syria would be gone. If we had followed the advice of the neocons, and I'm including Barack Obama in that, of both parties, Democrat and Republican, and we had gone in and bombed Assad, I can assure you that the better organized factions, ISIS, so forth, would be basically, sunning themselves on, in southern Syria, along, in some of the resort areas. Believe me, it's a foregone conclusion. Look what they're doing to Iraq, and Iraq's organized. It has a government. It has a military. It looks like their military doesn't have much morale because they surrender. Sadly, if you look at the videos, we can see what happens when you're an Iraqi soldier and you surrender, and they'll ask you, are you a Shia or Sunni? Are you a Muslim first? If you say you're not a Muslim, well, you know what happens then. Then they'll ask if you're a Shia or Sunni. Well, you know what happens if you say Shia. Well, you're dead. And I don't know what they do with the Sunnis afterwards, that are captured, but I'm sure it's not very pretty. They've been beheading Christians, in Iraq that they catch. Now, is it really to our advantage as a nation to topple Assad at this time, especially at this time when he's fighting the very people that, are threatening Iraq? Do you really want a situation in which you have a country carved out under control of these Islamic militants? Oh, wait a minute. Maybe you do. You're asking, well, what do you mean? I mean, I don't want to have that. Well, maybe the average American doesn't. Of course, the average American is more concerned with the price of potato chips and who's kicking that soccer ball, or who's got that navel or nipple or piercing or whatever, or, who looks a flabby, lately in their bikini when they go out on the beach and the paparazzi take a picture of them. Hopefully that's not the case, but it sure seems to be nowadays. Well, the people that are concerned are those people in the military-industrial security complex. Already, there's been statements by people who are in these security firms that like to monitor our every movement, saying that, oh, well, maybe now you don't want, maybe now you're talking privacy, or maybe now you're talking about how awful it is when there's these clampdowns and people get injured or something because someone raids a house that happens not to be the house that you're wanting to raid, or there some innocent person gets injured in that home. But when ISIS comes knocking at the door, then you'll be thankful for this. The thing is, the people that are really wanting to have this sort of situation, the people that want to have instability in the world, is the people that are going to profit from it. We got to keep that in mind. Do you realize that there was talk after the Soviet Union fell that we could take all that money and we could put it into other things? We could put it into alternative energy, or feeding the poor, or making a better world. Well, that sounds good when you hear about it. When people bring that up. But when it comes to the fact that you've spent several decades building a very advanced infrastructure that looks like a root to a weed system that you might try to pull out of your yard, but it's so entangled into everything that you can never get it all out. And it just grows back. That is what the military-industrial complex is. It's got its fingers into everything. That could be from, toilet paper companies that sell toilet paper to the military, to food, to, politicians who don't want to lose any kind of industry in their area. And now we've added to that the whole concept of the security state. Let's build multi-billion-dollar NSA systems in Utah, for instance, a conservative state. But come on, we got to get that money in there. Okay? The thing is that what really motivates a lot of, pretty much every politician is to get reelected. And to get to do that, you got to get projects in your area. So in other words, even if you're an ultra-liberal Democrat and there's talk about closing down something that's associated with the military-industrial complex in your district, you're going to fight it. And you're going to make deals with other congressmen and senators to make sure that not only do you preserve what you've got, but you expand it. And then when you have a threat like, after 9/11, if you'd had stock in some of these companies that were engaged in surveillance, my gosh, you know what would have happened. And then, to keep this ball rolling, you've got to keep the threat up. So in other words, if we have a situation where we've got a very militant organization that actually winds up in possession of a lot of weapons, very dangerous weapons, the kind that can shoot down airplanes, and so forth, passenger planes, then of course you're going to see TSA on steroids. You're going to see your cops are going to look like something that'll make the peacekeepers on Hunger Games look like a bunch of hippies from the 1960s. Okay? The thing is, this will play into the hands of so many different interest groups, as long as you have a world that is in chaos. Now, I just want to bring up something here. If you're talking about, let's say you just assume that the government is not really motivated by this. The government is not run by corporations and special interest groups and so forth. Okay, let's just throw this question out there. Aside from let's give a whole bunch of support to the rebels in Syria. Oh my gosh. I mean, at first I thought this was satire, and it's not. Let's pretend then, it's real. So, why then, I can understand why Obama would not want to send troops to Iraq, because he doesn't want to say, okay, well, I'm starting the whole Iraq process over again. I can understand that. But yet, we seem to be pretty liberal on our use of drones around the world, aren't we? I mean, we drone people in Pakistan. We drone people, when we were in Libya for that, what they said was not really a war. Well, that sure looked like a war to me. Use drones there. We use drones just about everywhere that we want to take some, we want to blow things up, but yet not risk our own pilots. And so therefore it doesn't get into the press. Why not then just send a bunch of drones in there and knock out some of these convoys that ISIS has? I mean, if the Iraq government is our ally, then doesn't it make sense that we'd want to protect a democratically elected ally? It seems like it just seems to make sense to me. It seems to be ironic that the only two entities right now that pose a threat to ISIS ultimately are Assad, who we want to overthrow, and Iran, who we have a tremendous number of sanctions against, and also we seem to want to overthrow. Does this, I don't know, it seems like a pattern, doesn't it? For some reason, for some, I mean, I don't know, it just seems like there seems to be a pattern that seems to be negative to Shia. I mean, if I was a Shia Muslim, I'd be kind of going, why is it that every time the Shias, lift their head up somewhere, the U.S. government wants to nail them? Okay, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to make any of those kind of, speculations about where Obama's heart sits and so forth, but it certainly doesn't seem to be with the Shia Muslims. And the thing is that I forgot too. You also have a situation in which if this region becomes unstable because you have territory controlled by these militants, basically would be a terrorist state. Just think how much money we can make off selling arms to the countries that don't want to be invaded. We could sell stuff to Jordan and Saudi Arabia and all the Gulf states. We could sell all kinds of arms to everybody. Won't that be wonderful? We could maybe even sell arms to the Kurds. The Kurds are not going to let ISIS take over their region. They've fought very hard to have their little territory. But now this is going to complicate things. If northern Iraq winds up declaring itself a Kurdish state, the Turks have already said that they don't want that they will fight. Which now, if Turkey would go against this and fight against the Kurds, who have all the oil in the north, the Shias have it in the far south, then could this not destabilize Turkey? Where Turkey has a quarter of its population is Kurdish. So if Turkey would in some way see a Kurdish state in northern Iraq as being a threat to it, and they start some sort of actions against them, wow, we could wind up with that whole region, even around the Mediterranean, in some sort of turmoil. Wow, there's the money to be made off selling weapons and telling the American public that we need to have more stormtroopers and more tanks rolling down the street when, Fourth of July holiday, we'll be having tanks rolling down the street in Peoria, Illinois, or Des Moines, Iowa, or Cheyenne, Wyoming, or something like that. But, this is the trend we're going into. I hate to say it, even liberal organizations are really feeling threatened now. It's not just the Tea Partiers. It's, people are raising concerns. Even the ACLU recently is like, hey, wait a minute, look at all this SWAT stuff going on and the militarization. We're getting into a kind of a scary state. And it seems that instead of the government saying, okay, whoa, let's pull back here, maybe we're going too far, they're going into turbocharge and doing things that are just totally against common sense and logic. Oh well. Anyway, I think I'm going to end this section here dealing with the current state in the Middle East, because I have a guest speaker who's said that he wants to come on and he'll talk about this next week. Now I'd like to shift focus. So that's it for Iraq and Middle East. Thank you for listening in. And now we're going to change our focus to something a little bit different. What I'd like to deal with now is the idea of sacrifice. Now, I brought it up a little bit with Iraq, that we've sacrificed a lot of soldiers and hundreds of billions of dollars trying to establish some sort of democracy. At least that was a stated objective, I guess, of the government in Iraq. Maybe it was just overthrow Saddam, I don't know. But ultimately, a lot of people sacrificed a lot. There's people out there that are still alive that have no legs or arms, lost their eyesight, any number of other disabilities because of this war. Americans. Of course, we know there's lots of Iraqis too. But I want to bring up the whole idea of sacrifice in general and deal with the idea that people in America, Western society in general, are making a lot of sacrifices today that may not be sacrifices they need to make, and may ultimately create a situation that is counter to what they really believe in. Now, let me bring up an example. I read a while back about someone, I think it was on global warming, that some guy was talking about questioning whether he was some important person, was questioning whether he wanted to have children because he felt that having a child would just increase the amount of pressure on the planet and ultimately cause problems for Mother Earth, Gaia, whatever you want to call it. I call it Earth, okay? But anyway, and then I knew someone where I used to live, and she was active in Right to Life, but she wasn't always. And without going into a lot of details, it seems that, I guess, she had 2 kids and wound up pregnant with a third, and she was part of that social circle back in the early to mid-70s that such a thing was like, oh my gosh, what are you doing to the planet? You have 2 already. You have a boy and a girl. How could you put any kind of pressure on the planet and have a third? So, they got rid of it. It wasn't, it was years later, of course, that she got involved in Right to Life. But irregardless of whether, on the abortion issue, I'm not going to really touch on that, pro, con, whatever, at this moment. I'm just thinking how many people out there really fall into this category and feel like they don't want to have families because of this notion that the world doesn't need more people. It can't handle more people. And so therefore, they take the course of getting sterilized for the good of Mother Earth, or limiting the number of kids they have, or so forth. And I'm not sure if this is a sacrifice people really need to be making. I don't know if they've really thought this out very well. But I'm going to deal with that issue and deal also with the issue of the idea of globalization and the sacrifices people have been asked to make there. Of course, they've been told that it will help them in the long run, but I don't know if it's really helping people by saying that we will close down factories, mines, forestry, and other resource-based industries in the United States and send them somewhere else, all in the name of some sort of global ideal. And this too I see as a Western people's sacrifice, when maybe it's not well thought out. Okay, so I'm going to deal with the whole idea of family, and then I'm also going to deal with economics. First, let's start with family. Okay. A society needs to have, and this is bare minimum, assuming no wars, no major diseases, or anything like that. A society, culture, subgroup, whatever you have out there, could be based on ethnicity, could be based on nation, could be based on religion, needs to have approximately around 2.1 to 2.2 average births per female in that society. Okay, that's minimum. Now, we've got to consider something here when we're talking about what I see as a rebirth of this kind of early 70s population paranoia. I'm seeing it starting to creep up in more left-leaning programs, news articles, and so forth. And I think it's something that is going to accelerate, which is somewhat ironic since the population's on decline in most countries in the West. But anyway, here's the thing. You need women to have this population size. Now, let's assume that everyone just had 2 kids. A stated goal, 2 kids. Okay? Just assuming. Now, if everyone sets a maximum level of 2 children per family in some sort of, we will sacrifice having any more, we'd like to maybe have 3 kids or 4 kids or more. There are a lot of women and men who do want to have large families and decide not to, even though they have the economics, the education, so forth. They can easily handle a larger family. But they stop at 2 because they feel pressured by society and so forth that this is not the right thing to do. And unfortunately, when it comes to religion, it used to be a counterweight that used to say, our religion says you should, whereas a society says you shouldn't. Most religion in America today is pretty much castrated. Don't you agree? I mean, it's still there. It still has all the ritual and so forth. But when it comes to real social statements and policy and really being the kind of rebels that John the Baptist or Moses or Noah, hey, think about what Noah was like. Come on, he must have been like a real super rebel. Okay? He wasn't some little chubby Santa Claus in a Middle Eastern outfit, basically herding animals. Okay, that's cartoon. This guy probably ruffled a lot of feathers, and he was probably of the upper or rich class. I mean, how do you afford to do what he was doing if you weren't? So he ruffled a lot of feathers. And we know that throughout the Old Testament, Torah, whatever, New Testament, even Islam, you got the prophets ruffled feathers, and they stood up against the societies they were living in. Okay, uncomfortable. Come on, do you think most of the priests and ministers and so forth in America really are of that caliber? Okay, I don't think so. Most of them don't make controversial stands. Most of them they kind of remind me in many ways, at least these mega churches. Now, maybe not all of them, but they kind of remind me of in the Soviet era where you had people allowed to go to church, but the clergy were pretty much controlled by the state. So you couldn't make statements on a lot of political issues. In fact, you could hold ceremonies, weddings, baptisms, and stuff, but you couldn't make statements on politics. And I think there's a lot of that in America today. So that's why I say castrated, eunuch. But anyway, the thing is that in society today, you have a huge number of people who just never will get married. In fact, the statistics are that many, many men are deciding it's not worth it. It's not worth the sacrifice. It's not worth what is involved in maintaining a long-term relationship, bringing children forth in the world. They have other distractions. They're like, it's becoming epidemic in Japan. There's over a third of the young male population identifies themselves as not wanting really to have relationships. In fact, it's starting to grow that many are turning to electronic girlfriends. I mean, manga type stuff. They have someone they can, talk to, take on dates and do whatever. We're not going to go into detail about that, but it's on their iPhone. And so that's the extent of their interaction with someone. Now, the thing is that if you've got a large number of men deciding that they're going to sacrifice family, if you've got a large number of women who will never get married and even have the choice, if they want to be married and have families, won't even have the chance to find a husband, and then many of them that do are part of this ethic that says don't have any more than 2 kids. Oh my gosh, support the environment. Maybe don't even have any kids. Maybe have one, if you want to be satisfied in your maternal instincts. And then even if you do want to have a family, it seems that infertility is going through the roof, especially for men. I can't tell you. I know a lot of guys who are sterile. Okay? And it seems to be something that's not just anecdotal, my knowing of some people who fall into this category or reading about it. It seems that the incidence of infertility, by the way, affects 1 in 6 couples in the United States at some point. Now, maybe half of them overcome it. That's a significant number if the other half don't. And it used to be, it was mostly problems with the female reproductive system. But now it's decreased sperm count. Now, I'm not sure I'd kind of get into that kind of conspiracy stuff about, trying to add in chemicals or GMO food that sterilizes people. I'm still examining that. I haven't made a choice about that. But it's pretty evident that if a person doesn't exercise, that lowers their testosterone. If you have a low testosterone, you have lower fertility. Okay? That's self-evident. If you are obese, that increases, again, hormones in your body that counteract testosterone, thus reduces your fertility. If you're stressed, you drink a lot, you do all these other kinds of things, again, reduced fertility, and so on and so on. So I'm just thinking, for those people out there who really feel compelled to oh my gosh, do I really want to have kids? Do I really want to have more than 2 or something like that? The wife or the husband, they're sitting there going, maybe it's time to have another kid. How would you feel about that? Maybe it's time to re-examine that and not automatically, because of social pressure, media pressure, educational pressure, to consider that that's not such a bad idea. Okay? I mean, it's sad when I see a lot of stable, moral couples, good educations, good health, deciding that, no, we can't do this because it might increase our carbon footprint, or maybe it'll increase starvation in some part of the world. It won't. And even if it did, even if a large number of kids being born in the United States, for instance, would put pressure on the environment, think about the fact that you're really not, it's not like we're growing. Look at all the schools, especially grade schools, shutting down all over America. They're not shutting down because there's no money for the schools. They're shutting down because the enrollment's down. I looked at Oregon, for instance. I looked at the number of children. This was during the 90s sometime. I looked at the number of children that were in public school in Oregon. And I compared it to how many children were in public school in the mid-60s, 30 years earlier. The population of Oregon had more than doubled, mostly through migration, Californians and so forth coming to Oregon, but the population had more than doubled. But the number of children was, I can't remember, it was almost identical or slightly lower, even with double the population. So the thing is that the only thing that's keeping the U.S. population somewhat stable, aside from immigration, is increased longevity. But that increased longevity will be counteracted. People eventually die. I mean, instead of maybe dying in your 60s because of something, you live to your 80s, it still catches up. And I mean, with the health habits of Americans nowadays, oh my gosh, I mean, the health, it's going to catch up big time soon. And you're going to see actually a decrease in longevity amongst Americans. But the thing is that when you consider how many people are not even getting married, how many people are not having kids, how many people can't have kids, your family of 2 expanding to 3 or 3 expanding to 4, if that is what you want, is not doing anything but maybe just replacing someone who can't have kids or won't have kids. It's not growth. It's actually just replacement. Someone's got to do it. Okay? So, again, why make the sacrifice? If that's what you want, go for it. And also maybe look at the whole premise of why people have fewer kids nowadays. You can't say it's totally economics. I mean, unless you're going to play with materialism. That's what I'm getting into right now. How many of us are trading things that have lifelong meaning for things that are transitory? Our society is based on the idea of use it, abuse it, throw it away, get something new. Okay? We're no longer a society where you even buy something to have in your home and think, I'm going to pass this on to my kids and my grandkids. No, you buy something, screw it together, put it together, whatever. You buy something cheap. You know it's going to wear out in 2, 3, 4 years. You throw it away, you get something else. First of all, that's not a very environmentally friendly society, but I would contend that materialism, not maternalism, is what is a big danger to our environment. Not, you look at the way your grandparents were. You bought a chair or a table or something like that. You intended that it last. That uses a lot less resources buying something that you're intending to keep for 20, 30, 40 years than buying something that's like, okay, well, when it gets scratched or chipped, I'm going to throw it away and go buy another one. And if you take a look at how many people go into debt so they can have a car that's really fancy, I mean, we could deal with Freud when he was talking about what a car symbolizes for someone when, you got some guy buying a big, fancy, expensive car that costs more than his parents bought for their house when he was growing up. And, there's some compensation going on there. But really, what really is important? I think probably when it comes to happiness and contentment, the family driving around the 10-year-old van with 4 or 5 kids piled in is probably way happier than the couple with no kids driving their fancy sports car down the road. I mean, ultimately, it's going to turn out that way anyway. Because you know what? The youngness, the youthfulness, when you're in your 30s or 40s or even 50s, that's going to transcend. In 20, 30 years, what are you going to have? You're going to be old. And the people that had kids, they're going to have a family. They're going to have a network. The people that sacrificed, well, I don't even know if they're even going to have Social Security and pensions to take care of them because the economy does not. I mean, if you look at the economy, it's, I don't know, it's like having a wooden boat infested with termites. It's still floating, but eventually it's just going to crumble and sink. That's my prognosis. And that's not the end of the world. If the economy collapses, people that have family will still, have each other. People that don't, well, see how much that fancy home or that fancy car is going to be worth after that. So anyway, take a look at what we're teaching, those who do have kids. Look what the society teaches them. Look at children's TV. Without mentioning any networks or programs or whatever specifically, look what it teaches them. That everything is a joke. There is nothing to sacrifice for. And we're wondering why kids don't do as well on tests as they used to. We're wondering why they're doing worse in regards to dealing with pressure at school or in life or at their jobs. And we raise them on the idea that every problem is solved in 30 minutes, or that it's just something to laugh at, or the solution when you're having a problem is go out and shop and buy more things. Or if someone says something to you, you don't learn diplomacy. You don't learn how to interact with people effectively. You learn how you watch TV where it's just some silly one-liner you throw. Our politics are even turning this way. It's almost like we relish in the idea, hey, he or she has the best one-liners. I'm going to vote for them. And you don't look at what their substance is. Well, if you have a society that has lost the concept of what it is to sacrifice, of what it is to do without, and then on TV that's just reinforced. In fact, it's even done more so because most people don't have those wonderful glittery lifestyles on TV. Okay? They're fake. They're artificial. And if they are real, then you get some movie star or something people look up to, or singer, or sports star, and you see the outward appearance. And people are willing to sacrifice everything to have that kind of lifestyle. I saw a picture. So it was one of those Facebook memes, but it was really good. It was on an Arab site. And it shows a picture of a guy, and he's got a thing attached to his head, and then like a fishing pole out in front of his head, with money dangling down, and he's chasing it, and he's about ready to fall into his grave. Essentially with the message that, sacrifice everything to go for that money, and then you die. I mean, what kind of reality is that? What kind of purpose in life is that promoting? But it is the way people are living nowadays. Oh yeah, if I have time to fit it into my busy schedule, I may do this or this or this. We see it in politics. You tell someone, hey, do you realize what's going on here? Do you realize how far we've gone, and maybe we should do this, or maybe we need to try to organize something? And they say, I don't have time. But they do have time to sacrifice to sit in front of a reality show. People that, when it comes to health, they'll spend 4 or 5 hours watching TV, when just an investment of 30 minutes a day, go out for a walk or something for a person that's healthy, starting out, would make them healthier and preserve their health. You always have to throw that stipulation in. Check with your doctor first. But the thing is that we're becoming a society that has lost the idea of true sacrifice to bring something better, and instead we're sacrificing the good things, the things that used to define us as a people, the things that used to define us spiritually and in all other areas of life. And we're sacrificing those things so that we become an image on TV of what we're supposed to be. We fit in. We become consumers rather than citizens. We become obsessed with the way we look versus our character. We become obsessed with the kind of car someone drives instead of their ideas. To the point that I think that if you have a situation where someone comes on TV and they say they've got some, they're being interviewed on TV and it's a woman and she's dressed very conservatively and maybe something that she bought or made herself or bought very cheap, we have a tendency not to trust her as much as the person dressed nicely in the fancy outfit. We trust the guy in the really expensive tailor-made suit before we trust the guy in a simple sweater. And that is a dangerous area to get into. Because then we get into those areas where we find that when societies collapse, it's when they become obsessed with the self versus having a sense of family first, and then community, and then nation. We instead, it's all me, myself, and I. And ultimately, psychologically, I don't think that's going to bring people happiness. ultimately, it's not going to do our society any good, because you can have, in America, you can have 330 million self-absorbed people, and maybe temporarily that'll be great for selling all kinds of plastic goodies you import from other countries. But something's going to happen in the future eventually that you're not going to have the means to get all those plastic goodies. Then what? And then when you wake up one morning and realize nothing is made in America except cheap burgers and corn chips, that everything's made in other countries, and the economy collapses, and then, you don't have that thing to fall back on. See, the Depression, when the Depression hit, the economy got back on its feet because we still had the infrastructure. People forget that. We still had the mills that just had to be restarted, especially when World War II started. We could just clean up everything and get everything rolling again. Well, those mills have been turned into scrap iron, or been torn down, or been turned into microbreweries. So the next time the economy of the world corrects itself, and you wind up with an economic downturn on a massive scale, and then it builds itself back up again, you won't have that infrastructure in the United States anymore, or Europe for that matter, especially northwestern Europe. You won't have it. So then what? You can't have an economy based on hamburgers and corn chips. Anyway, the thing is, I'm not trying to be depressive. I'm just trying to say this. Those people who put their priorities right, who maybe make the sacrifices in the right areas, may be the ones who, no matter what happens in the future, they'll be in a better position. They'll have one another to fall back on and be able to climb out, because, it will get better eventually. But those that are sacrificing for the plastic today, who knows? I mean, I don't know. I don't know if the government will be there to take care of them if they don't have families. Maybe those sacrifices they made ultimately won't matter, even in that economic sense. So anyway, just a few thoughts there for people to think about when considering the future and considering trends that they see around them today. And again, like I say at the beginning of our shows, question authority. Question me, but also, maybe question what you've been taught and what you hear in the media and what you see in the media and what the government tells you. Anyway, just wishing you all a happy week, and catch you next week on another episode of Unlock the Door Radio here at UCY TV.
He was trying to get out of people's mind the unconscious motivations that they had for purchasing. These could be sexual, they could be psychological, they could be sociological, they could be a demand for status, a demand for recognition. There were things that people couldn't verbalize or wouldn't verbalize because they were too secret to them. They were too much a part of their nature, and they would be embarrassed. They would be embarrassed if they came out and said things like this.
He would interview people, but not ask them direct questions, but let them talk freely like you do in psychoanalysis. And that was his background.
And so he said, why can't we have a group therapy session about products? All right? And so Dichter built this room up above his garage, and he said we can have psychoanalysis of products. They can actually act out and verbalize their wants and needs.
What we're going to do is try a couple of these salad dressings. So let's see what happens. Here's our typical